Hey, thank you for tuning in to Wagz Film Radio. This is Wagz. I actually have an awesome guest here. Last week I actually had a really cool guest on the show, Raquel Williams with Can I Live Ministries, who's doing some really good things about the 1 million moms off welfare. It was a great talk about women and trying to get them off welfare and on the right track. But today, this week and next week, I have a guest on here that's going to be talking about men, because I believe men are really the backbone to a lot of relationship problems and things like that. It's really all falls back on our shoulders. I think it's kind of biblical. But today I've gotten Michael Thompson on the air with me with Zoe Ministries, who wrote a book called The Heart of the Warrior. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael?
It's good to be here, Bobby. Thanks for letting me join the ranks of the Wagz larger family, Wagz Nation, I guess you guys might have going on. It's really good to be with you. And I father of three, husband to one. My wife Robin and I have been involved in ministry for a lot of years. At a college, we both stepped into the ranks of Campus Crusade, and particularly Athletes in Action. Loved those years, 17 years on staff with Campus Crusade. I went back to school, got a master's in counseling from a seminary down the road here in Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina. And then probably about 2001 is when we started moving on a trajectory towards what now is Zoe and what I get to do day to day these last almost 10 years. So we started to have more and more relationships off campus and in friends' lives, marriages, family, friends in the Durham Chapel Hill area, and more our phone would ring. Is, hey, do you have time for coffee? Can we get together? And that was one ingredient of a few that began to kind of move us away from campus ministry at Duke and University of North Carolina and NC State in this area, and more into the older folks' lives. And I mean, when you're working with college kids, they stay 18 to 21, 22, and then they graduate and move on. But people that we had been friends with for a lot of years here in this area Rob and I began to have opportunities to encourage them, be a part of helping put some marriages back together.
That's awesome.
Being able to work with a lot of men. I was always, even while I was on campus with working with students and student athletes, I always had a group of friends that were my age, 30s, 30-somethings, and we'd have a get-together Bible study. Back in the day, when Promise Keepers had its big run.
I used to love Promise Keepers.
Oh, they had a great run and did great things for men and men's hearts. But, that was some of the genesis of some of my, 30-something friendships and into my 40s. But, so Robin and I left staff in 2005 and went kind of full swing into this thing we call Zoe. And Zoe is the Greek word for life. You might know, or your listeners might know, that passage that's pretty famous in John 10:10, where Jesus says, I came that they might have life, might have it to the full, might abundant life. That word life is Zoe.
Gotcha. And I noticed in your book, too, you talk a lot about the life.
Yeah.
With a capital L.
Yeah. There's a life that God's offering and that we were made for, that we want to, through the pages of the Heart of a Warrior book, want to either reacquaint men with or introduce them to this kind of life. So, that's where that word comes from, and where we felt like God was putting it over the mantle of our hearts, and that this is where Robin and I were moving in terms of what we wanted to offer and what we wanted to enjoy, both this kind of life, this big life, God life, life with God, life through Christ. All that stuff is Zoe. So we started that in 2006, and really, like I said, with a bunch of friends. We stepped into the world of little entrepreneurial ministry, mission, platoon, if you will, tribe, and started holding some events and some weekends and offering to other men. And it's just kind of grown since then, since back in 2006, and now we've got conferences and retreats around the East Coast, and
nice.
And a lot of the Heart of a Warrior, the book that we're talking about, it was formed and fashioned in those years, over those 10 years of working with men, walking with men, helping men, and I'm still a customer myself.
Well, I think we all are.
Oh yeah, I haven't fully seemed like I've graduated, or maybe I have from certain grades. That maybe this is my. If you have a 5th-year senior, I might be a 10th-year senior in this game of how does it look to be a godly man? What's it look like to walk with God at this stage of my life at 50, older children in this stage, and maybe I could be helpful to those who are on the path or coming up the path, and the kind of things that we all get bounced around from life. The enemy is very cunning, very accomplished at knocking us off the road. So those were some of the things that we wanted to write about. But that's how it started. That's where the environment changed from being on staff with a great ministry like Campus Crusade, and then going over to starting our own, and then seeing it grow and having some impact.
That is awesome. Yeah. I didn't know much about what was going on, and I have a buddy, Patrick Dunnigan. He's a great filmmaker, and he's a buddy of mine. And he had called me up and said, "Hey, Wagz, you mind helping me out? I got this project that we're looking to film." And it's a DVD series for a Christian book that's to help the heart of men. And so I said, well, of course, man. I love working with Patrick. I said, I'll be more than happy to jump on board. Let me come. And I remember rolling up to this huge house in the middle of nowhere, just nothing but just stretches of land and huge lake and fields. It was just so beautiful. And I'm like, I'm really going to spend the weekend here doing this? This doesn't feel like the normal film set I'd sit on, something fun. But there was something greater I feel like I got out of it. I was there just to say, okay, I'm going to run a camera, I'm going to do whatever's needed to get it done. But when I heard you and Blake and the other guys sitting around the living room talking when we were filming, it touched my heart deeply. It really made me start to search myself. Saying, how can I be that better man? How can I show that love of Christ better? And on my radio show too, there's something that helped derive from that I've been talking about a lot is, sometimes as a man, as we're walking out there in the world, the closest resemblance of Christ that people are going to see is through us. And are we truly showing that true Christ love out there in the streets? And just what we did, just hung around the fire and talked and was able to be real with one another and open up. I talked about some of the struggles I was going through with the movie Bragging East I was working on. And it was refreshing and it felt empowering. And when I got back home, I was like, okay, I'm ready to be that better dad. I'm ready to be that better husband, ready to be that better friend. And it was all just it wasn't an elaborate thing. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't as hard as people make it out to be.
Right.
I think as men, we just overcomplicate things. And in this situation, it was pretty much no nonsense.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking at your book here, Heart of a Warrior, looking at the cover, I noticed that you have a heart. It's spelled a little different. It's H-E and then A-R-T, which spells heart, but the way it's designed, it looks like he art.
Yep.
Tell me something about that.
Yeah, the he art wasn't what we were going for. It was really this as much as we were going for heart and the heart of a warrior and the duality or maybe the trifecta of there's an art to this. There's a practice. I mean, there's a way of mastery. Jesus had a practice of a certain kind of life. Yes, he died. Yes, thank you for the cross. Thank you for forgiveness. But it was so that we could have a kind of life. And he modeled that life. And he had these apprentices. He had these 12 guys that he was trying to show. This is what life is supposed to look like. This is how life can be lived. Life in relationship to the Father. And he is the life. So that practice, you look at these guys in the Gospels that hung around with Jesus closely, and they were struggling well, might be a nice way to put it, but then you look at these guys' life in the book of Acts. It's not the same guys, but it's the same guys.
Yeah. You can see the transition.
They began to practice what they had learned, and Jesus said they would. He imparted, he gave, he instructed, he taught. These were the guys that when there was a huddle, they were in it. And he was explaining to them why he said what he did or what's the parable mean or or how the kingdom works. I mean, those are all the kind of things that I look at my life as a disciple of Christ, and all the years that I spent in church, which was a lot, and doing ministry, and I find that almost into my 40s, I'm learning a whole new glossary of terms, a whole new understanding. Like a lot of colors got dropped in to the landscape of what a life with Christ looked like. And when they did, it just expanded the artistry, what Jesus is up to in my life, and how he's inviting me to live like him, as if that was possible. And for so long, I think I just believed very subtly that there was just going to always be this incredible distance between me and Jesus. That I'm the problem, I'm the mess, he's him, I'm not. When in reality, the message invites us, no, we can be more and more and more and more like him.
Yeah.
That he wants to live in us and through us and invite us to live this way. So that's where the art came from, was this practice that we're going to learn.
Kind of like the art of a warrior.
Yeah, and we're going to learn we're going to learn techniques, we're going to learn abilities, we're going to learn skills, we're going to learn the way of Christ.
Perfecting the craft of becoming more Christ-like.
Yes, and he's going to he's going to coach us, he's going to counsel us, right? The Holy Spirit is referred to by Jesus as a counselor, a comforter, a guide, a teacher. I mean, those are all instructional, those are all hands-on, those are all roles that we're going to need help. Learning how to live this way. And so that's why we wanted that. And the work is done in our hearts. So this practice, this skill set, this learning, and then Jesus gives us the role and responsibilities of going and taking this, live this way, share this, love one another, all these things that he was about. Then he cuts keys and gives the family car to the disciples, and they've been given it to a sense. And, all of us have had a few wrecks here and there. We've driven off a cliff now and again. But the whole point was to entrust to us something so precious and valuable that we're going to have to learn how to wield it, how to offer it, and how to live in it. And that's where the art part came in, the art of a warrior. And then the warrior part, this is not going to go easy. I mean, Jesus had tribulation and troubles. They killed him, for goodness sakes. I mean,
it wasn't an easy path.
No, but it was a glorious path. And I think this is the kind of path that he even marked out for the disciples. They marked out for us in their letters to the first century church, and these things that are still true, that we're going to have to fight for this freedom that God has given us through Christ.
It's not always easy.
No, we're going to have to protect it. We're going to have to fight for it, because we are in a spiritual battle. We are. It's emphatically clear through the scriptures that we live in a war zone between two kingdoms, and we need to have some training. We need to understand how it works. We need to be not on the casualty side, but on the rescuing side of that equation. And that's the privilege that I think a man who is oriented, a man who knows, a man who's skilled, he can be that man. He can step in at his home front, in his marriage with his kids, and in relationships with his friends.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of it, having that art and that training and the constantly, training yourself is extremely important. I remember when I was in karate when I was a kid, I would just, they would have us sit there and throw a punch over and over and over. I was like, how many times do I have to learn to throw a punch? You do it over and over again. And then finally, I even perfected to the point where I was able to break boards.
Right.
But they still constantly made me throw the punch, because it was all about perfecting that art. Yeah. And I think as Christians and as men, we need to be constantly perfecting that art of being that Christ-like person, like you're talking about, is just perfecting that. And it's not going to be easy.
Right.
There's a scripture in the Bible that says, I rejoice in my struggling, because I know my struggling produces endurance. Mm-hmm. And that is so important to me, because, one of the things that I look at is that you don't grow strength until your weakness is exposed. It's just like when you go to the gym and you're lifting weights. Mm-hmm. If I picked up 2-pound weights and was sitting there just going at it, and I just, lifted it, 100 times, then went in front of the mirror and flexed a little bit and said, okay, I'm done, I've done absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But it's until I lift so much weight that my weakness is exposed, and I have to call on Jesus to help me lift it, and have to call on my friends to help me lift that weight, that's the time that I'm gaining the most strength. And sometimes we allow that weakness to take over us, and we don't have that fellowship, the friends. We don't have that relationship with God that we feel like we can just reach out to him and just say, okay, Jesus, I need help here, and feel like he's really going to be there because, like you were saying, you felt like there was this huge distance between you and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, I had to overcome, earlier, 10 years maybe or so ago, I had a belief that was operational to a detriment. I really believed it was about, life was so much more about convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to avoid messes, trying to arrange so that they wouldn't happen. I mean, there's nothing more futile than that belief, but yet that's what I believed. If what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, that no, we live in an area of conflict. There's going to be the people are going to bounce into one another, if not crash into one another, and there's something that could really be redeeming about all that. I mean, when God wants to work something into your life, like you said, the 2-pound weights aren't going to handle it.
No.
When he wants to show you that you have it within you to be more patient, more kind, more loving, you're going to be put in an environment, in a moment that's going to need that. And in those moments of weakness, the exposure to that, like you were saying, Bobby, is actually the glorious thing. But if you think life is about convenience and inconvenience, you'll miss the lesson. You will miss the exercise. You will miss the training module every time because you're just so inconvenienced by what didn't happen or what should have happened or why did this happen. Those are the kind of things that too many men are falling to that keep them from the kind of strength that
God wants
that as they walk with God could be theirs.
Yeah, that actually speaks to me pretty strong right now because I'm even thinking of my personal life, and I'm one of those type of people that I will do everything to avoid the conflict, and sometimes even just allow that conflict to continue to move on, even if it makes me angry, and just brush it off. But I'm really not growing as a man if I allow that to happen and I don't confront those things in my life. It allows me to enable other people to live an ungodly lifestyle around me, and that's not what we were called to do.
Yeah.
There is a loving way to do it and a loving way to handle it. You don't go in there angry. You don't go in there with hatred.
Right.
But you go in there with love, and to fix that issue, even though it could create conflict. And that speaks deep to me. Because I can think of about 3 things that are going on in my personal life right now.
And every man has them: 3, 4, 5, 7, 10.
Yeah.
And that I love what you said about anger. There's a part in the book about why are you so angry? I mean, angry can be a huge clue into something that needs attention. Talk about weakness. I mean, why are you so angry? What are you angry about? I mean, the enemy loves to fire us up, to get us, light a match in one of those moments where anger, we're just so angry. The grit teeth, and either we explode or we go silent, dormant. That's kind of 2 paths.
Yeah, I'm normally the silent one.
Right.
I'm kind of like a fart. I'm silent, but then whenever I need to be, I'm deadly. There's nowhere in between. I'm silent but deadly.
Yeah, and everybody's looking around the room. What was that?
Yeah.
So
and then I go run and hide, because I don't want the blame to come back on me.
But a man who's in touch and in tune and can see and hear the moments that anger's coming up and go, okay, what's this about, Jesus? Why am I so angry? And now you're in prayer. Isn't that odd? Now you're actually talking to your king and saying, why am I so been out of shape here? And if you'll sit in that, I believe he'll show you, because you believe that this, shouldn't happen to you. And now you've got a lie that you're believing, and he wants to set you free from that lie so that anger won't be the fallback or the enemy's way to be really disruptive in a marriage or between a father and son or father and daughter. I mean, anger can be a huge clue as to a place, like you said, where there's a weakness that needs some attention. But if you're not wanting to do that extra exercise or get in there with Jesus and say, okay, why can't I not lift this? Why can I not handle this with my wife? Why am I so angry? Mm-hmm. You'll walk away from that lesson. You'll walk away from that training moment again and again and again because you're inconvenienced. See how that? I mean, it's just
And so, if you never learn from it, you'll
Right.
never advance to the next stage.
Yeah.
You know, I've always said, you know, I don't believe life should be mountains and valleys. You know, I always believe it's kind of like you're climbing a mountain the whole time because God's got a goal for you, and you're constantly climbing this mountain, but obstacles come in the way. And if you don't ever take the time to learn how to overcome those obstacles, you'll never be able to advance further in life where God wants you to be. God allows those obstacles to be there. He may make you climb a small hill,
Yeah.
you know, to start climbing up the mountain because he knows there's a huge cliff ahead that you've got to, you know, do some really strong stuff, but he needs to strengthen you to get there
And
and overcome what's coming up.
And we think because the obstacle's in the way, we're inconvenienced, rather than what if God wants you to park it right there, turn around and look at the scenic view and just sit with him for a while.
Yeah. What is God? I mean, why does God have me here? You know,
Yeah.
there's sometimes God needs us to hold off. I've said the same thing about the movie Bragging East. You know, God, why is it taking so
Right.
long? But then when I sit back and I'm sitting there and say, okay, God, I'm going to keep an eye out for your work, I start to see these little things happening all around me. And I'm like, okay, I see why.
Yeah.
Okay, I see why. God is paving a path for me. And I think too many men, you know, speaking of warriors, like to run into battle
Run the field, yeah, rush the
before
field.
God is there.
Right.
And the Bible says that God will go before you and level the mountains and break
Yeah.
through the iron gates. You know, and us men are trying to do those things.
Yeah.
And God's like, I'm not calling you over there yet.
Yeah.
So I agree with you 100%. But let's get on the book.
Okay, sure.
I like to sit here and talk.
I think we've been on the book a little
Yeah,
bit,
we
but
have.
somewhere in there, I'm not sure what page number we're on, but yeah, I like it. I like what you're sharing. I like what we're talking about.
Why did you actually write Heart of a Warrior? What was the reason behind saying,
Yeah.
I have to write this? Was it something that happened in your life or someone else's life? Or?
Yeah, it did. It was me and my friends. I feel like we stumbled upon something really ancient and really, really significant. We were talking about the Promise Keepers movement. We were talking about, you and I just a minute ago, we talk about, you know, this battle to fight, to enter in. And though, you know, the title is The Heart of a Warrior, the subtitle is really, really important. Before you can become the warrior, you have to become the beloved son. That's why I wanted to write the book. I saw, like you said, so many men getting a little bit of information, kind of getting a pep talk, getting charged up, and then trying to rush the field. And the enemy of our lives, of our hearts, of our intimacy with God and each other, the enemy, the kingdom of darkness, Satan, his whole campaign, it survives because we're not the beloved sons, and he picks us off easily by threatening us with something, or by lying to us about ourselves or about God or about others. So when a man is subject to those kind of lies, he can't advance in the battlefield because he'll be taken out by the enemy. He'll compromise himself. He'll unfortunately, you know, when you see, and where we got a lot of this understanding and this exploration from, when Jesus is in the wilderness and he's led after the baptism by his cousin John, the next chapter starts, Jesus then led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness where he was tempted for 40 days. So, you know, kind of like, whoa, wait a minute. He goes from this celebration, this validation with the Father who says, this is my son in whom I'm well pleased. This is my boy. I'm so excited. I'm proud of him. I mean, those are some loose translations of the reality of that moment. This is my son in whom I'm well pleased. Then, I mean, he's barely dried off, and the scriptures transition to he's being led then into the desert, into the wilderness for this time of testing, this time of temptation. Well, there's a key thing that just happened prior to the battle. Validation.
Yeah.
He's the beloved son. He's going to need to know that when Satan says, if you are, right, this questioning of Jesus's identity. If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. I mean, we kind of jump past the if you are piece. This is very important. I think in any man's life, do you know who you are? And the only way you can know who you are is you've got to go back in your story and find out who's been responsible for the answers, who's helped you understand and come to some kind of understanding about who you are. And that's going to be tested. That's going to be challenged by an enemy who wants you to fail, who wants you to compromise, who wants you to bow up and try to, come almost out of character and into some caricature. The false self that we all contend with. This is where the enemy has his portal in to a man's life and a woman's life. Anybody that is on this planet suffers from that condition, fallenness, and therefore has this false self. So if you are is a huge question. And if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a settled heart, if your identity is not, that question hasn't been answered by a loving Father, like Jesus is inviting us to have it answered by a loving Father, like the Father loved the Son and put things to rest. You see Jesus' response to Satan in the wilderness, and it seems pretty calm. I know who I am, and no, I'm not going to do that.
I
don't have to do that.
Is what it really brought to mind was Satan actually came in and was using his physical and emotional, fleshly desires.
To try to use it against him, right?
Yes, it's natural. He was hungry. And there's a pride thing. He tried to poke the pride at him. If you are the Son of God, and that's as men, we normally get prideful.
Yeah.
We give into emotions, and that's what normally leads us astray. And Satan is always there doing it. But you have, the one thing that Jesus was is he was confident in who he was to God.
Yeah.
And who he was as a man.
Yeah.
And a lot of us don't have that.
Yeah. So that's where we start. The first half of the book is so much about, before you can become the warrior, you have to become the beloved son. I believe, my friends and I, we really believe that this is really about receiving God's love. That's first. That's foundational. That's critical. And not just once, but over and over and over again. I mean, I still want to be loved by my dad.
Oh, yeah.
I've been his son for 50 years on this planet. That hasn't gotten old yet. I still want to receive, from him the things that I long for and desire from him, and his presence, like no other man on this planet, has a huge contribution, a huge factor in my life, in my well-being. Well, some of us didn't have good dads.
Yeah.
Some of us didn't even know our dads. So there's a part of that we got to talk about in the book in the earlier stages of, some guys come into this pretty broken. There's levels of brokenness. There's levels of neediness. There's levels of confused. There's levels of hurt. So and none of us are immune. Even if your dad, batted 990, he didn't bat 1,000. No dad can.
Yeah.
But the enemy's that good at trying to, take a man out. Yeah, especially when he's young. There's things in the book that we invite a man to look back in his story, because if he's 30, 40, or 50 and he's never explored his backstory, then he's not going to be able to handle those moments of conflict when the enemy says, if you are.
Yeah.
He's going to be subject to, those taunts, sometimes the lies, the accusation, or the guilt or the shame. These are the things that the enemy really works well with to our detriment. And so, the enemy won't have to fight hard or long if we're subject to some of those old beliefs about ourselves, not enough, unable, weak. I mean, the kind of things that really a man struggles with. Security, protecting, providing, those are things that men think about a lot. And really it's work, money, the home front. Those are things that most men are pretty committed to thinking about. Am I ready for my kids' high school? Am I ready for my kids' college? Am I ready for my kids' marriage? How am I doing in mine?
Well, it's funny because my wife could ask me about, I want to do this to the house, I want to do that to the house. First thing that pops in my head is, boy, I see money.
Right.
And my wife just sees the art behind it and all these other things. So, it's very true. The guy does think about the finances and the home front and, being able to provide those things. And it's like, okay, I know she wants this. How do I accomplish that?
So now you see the easy pickings. I mean, if you have to make everybody happy through and with and by money, you're going to see a man who's trying to control everything. to his advantage,
Yeah.
so that he can be the man, he can be the husband, be the provider. And he's more actually in that case, he's fallen to a place where the enemy has him more self-reliant than God-reliant. Oh, I'm sure he goes to church on Sundays and gives his tithe and offering. But you understand what I'm saying? There's something functioning much deeper at a core level, at a heart level, where life is up to me making good choices to provide for my family. So who's got the pen now in that story? Who's writing that story?
Is
who's
it God or is it you?
Yeah, and most men...
No, it's not to confuse it for being a lazy man.
No,
there's a huge difference there.
Correct,
You know,
absolutely.
And, taking full control of something or allowing God to direct you are two different things.
I love what you said about the film. Asking God, why is this not happening fast enough? And then sticking around for the answers and seeing that he has some things he wants to do with the journey of this film, not just the production.
Exactly.
And the accomplishment
I could have gotten so angry, which we talked about anger before, where it completely blinded me from seeing the things that God was actually doing in my life and looking around.
Oh, yeah.
Because we spend so much time, focusing on the negative that we fail to see the positive in our life. I used to tell the cop buddies on the beat with me. They used to come with me sometimes to the chief or to all these meetings where, no one understood what I was doing, and sometimes I'd be belittled or this or that. And they would come out just saying, man, that meeting was horrible. I was like, man, that was great. They're like, why? I said, you're focusing too much on the negative. Look at the positive that came out of that meeting. What positive? And then I would throw that one little nugget at them, and they'd be like,
I didn't see that.
I didn't see that, but I can now see where that could be good,
Right.
And it's just that way.
Yeah.
But before we dig into this, I know there was a couple more questions we want to ask. Is this book for believers?
Oh, yeah. I think definitely it's got a bent towards a Christ follower, somebody who's been trying to walk with God, trying to. We talk a little bit about serving God in the book, and try to recapture some things in different chapters there. But
so someone who's never really or isn't a Christian, if they pick this up, it's probably not going to relate very well.
Here's what I found with some of the guys who have read it in giving it test drives, and giving it some trials and mileage. It's actually been a book that a lot of guys say, I wish I'd have gotten this earlier. I wish I'd have gotten this when I first became a believer. And even to me, that there's an encouragement with, what if we'd have started on this path from the beginning of our faith journey? How would that have changed? And so that it's been real encouraging to see that. I think it's predominantly for a man who's wanting to walk with God, who's maybe struggling and not struggling well, who wants to recapture some things, look back in the story. We talk about looking under the hood. We talk about looking in the basement, looking in the attic. I mean, we are all a collection of contributing moments in our lives that have formed our beliefs and our attitudes and our perspectives about life and how it works. And most of us, I know I did, I tried to fit God into that rather than giving God all of that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I remember trying to fit God in my life instead of just giving God all of my life.
And I didn't know how. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how, but I knew how to go to church, and I knew how to, be faithful there. But I think the book it's an invitation for an exploration of your past, so that you can move well into the future, especially if you've been asking some of the same questions for years.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those questions start with why. Why does she always do that? Why do I never? Why is it so hard? Those are the kind of questions I think the book is very helpful at helping a man journey into a walk with God because it's not one answer. Your life is so different than mine. The variables are so unique to you that you're going to need a custom guide. You're going to need a personal counselor, one who knows your life and story.
There's really no dummy guide to this, where you just go to the bookstore and say dummy guide to life as a male. It's just not that way.
Right.
I know you've been referring to warrior. Is there a reason why you use the term warrior?
Yeah, I love I love the imagery from, the Old Testament has a lot of warrior scriptures. I mean, we look back at David's life and the mighty men who fought in Israel, in Judah, the nation of Israel, and all these were men who knew how to fight, who were trained, skilled, and we don't have it's not like, even though we have a Prince of Peace, we have a Christ the Messiah, who has gone and fought for us, delivered us from the chains, the bondage, brought us into freedom. It's pretty clear through the New Testament. No, we're going to have to provide and protect and understand how to live this way in this freedom, and that's going to take a while. That's going to be a journey. So when we talked about a warrior, we talked about somebody who knows how to fight, but the fight's not against your wife or your kids or your employer or your employees. The battleground is the spiritual realm, and being accomplished and being well trained and skilled at how to fight, how to defend, how to protect, how to pray against the enemy, how to pray in alignment with God's kingdom and kingdom ways. I mean, those are things we talk about in the latter part of the book. But again, before you can become the warrior, you have to become the beloved son. You have to know that he is crazy about you.
And I love the term warrior, because I think it's everything. Every guy out there has this.
We sure relate to that.
Masculine
you talk
desire.
About filmmakers. I mean, how many times are we going to tell that story?
Yeah.
20 years. This year is the 20th anniversary of Braveheart.
Wow. 20 years?
20 years.
I can't believe it's been 20 years.
And we watch the same scenes over and over again. It still has a power and an effect on men's lives.
Oh, it is.
Maximus and Gladiator.
Oh, yeah.
Neo. I was with some guys at lunch today, and the film Neo, Matrix. The Matrix came up. I mean, that's another film that's been out 15 years.
Wow.
And so they were talking about these great scenes in that story of Neo learning how to become a man who's oriented and a man who can step into this environment. I mean, granted, it's science fiction and all the machines, and it's very interesting. But Neo is a man who's learning how this system works. And as Morpheus, right, his Yoda instructs him how to operate within that system dangerously for good. That's another term we love in the book. Dangerous for good.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm thinking, Gladiator and all these other things. It just pumps you up. I've watched 300 and I want to go work out. I'm ready to jump into the air with a spear and see what I can do. And I probably look like an idiot doing it, but it would be fun.
Hey, trained up a little bit, and who knows?
So, is there a blog out there?
Yeah, we've been doing a blog with the book at the website's heartofawarriorbook.com, and you can find the blog there, The Warrior's Heart.
So blog on Braveheart?
Yeah, actually right now we're doing a series I've been writing about some of the pivotal scenes in the film Braveheart that capture men that are significant in the storyline. And that's a great, imagery of the film Braveheart. This last blog specifically, Bobby, talked about what we're talking about. Before William Wallace leads, this Scottish rebellion, I mean, he suffers great loss as a boy. His dad is murdered. Malcolm is his father, is murdered. He's just a little opening few scenes, and all of a sudden there's this casualty. Longshanks, Edward Longshanks, this king who's come into the power of England, kills Malcolm and several other good Scottish men. So William Wallace is now fatherless. They're at the funeral. So this last blog we wrote about the significance of this rider who comes up. I mean, they're putting dirt on the grave, and up comes this rider who's Malcolm's brother, Argyle. And then we have this exchange between Argyle and young William Wallace. It lasts for 5 or 6 minutes in the film, and then it's they're on a horse-drawn wagon, and Argyle's taking young William away.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't hear from William for 20-some years. He comes back, and he wants to raise crops and have a family and live in peace if he can.
Yeah.
So, this last blog was really about how significant those 10, 15 minutes in the film were with Argyle, but set up the next 20 years of his training when he then comes into the scene back in his home, where he goes back to the homestead that he was a boy. And, we look at Jesus's life. I mean, we get a pretty good pause from they're at the Passover, the caravan going away. All of a sudden, Mary looks around. Where is Jesus? Joseph, I thought you had him. I thought you had him. So they end up going back, and he's there in the temple. So after that, we don't see a whole lot of storyline for about 15, 20 more years, and then here Jesus steps into the wedding with his mom, and the water turns into wine. I mean, Braveheart has a real similar storyline as this rebellion against the bondage and the slavery from England, and yet Jesus steps into our story to deliver us from the bondage and the slavery of sin. So it's a very interesting parallel, and we utilize that a few times in the book, but we wrote about it in the blog some.
I notice also here, right in the very beginning of your book, you actually quoted part of the
Braveheart scene.
The Braveheart scene. Mm-hmm. So you have a good Scottish accent.
I don't. Do you?
No, I was going to say you can
You're
play
the
Wallace.
Actor. You're the actor.
You can play Wallace, and I'll play the veteran, and we can see.
No,
how
you
that
play
plays.
Wallace. I'll play the veteran. You got the shorter line.
I am not Yeah, I don't mind the shorter line. But that's where he actually comes out and says, "They'll never take our freedom." I think that's such a
that scene is huge in the film. Yeah, I mean, they're there. They're about to give away Scotland. They're about to, compromise their land, their heritage, all of that. And up comes Wallace with the painted face.
Yeah.
And there's the speech, on the horse.
He's ready to battle.
There's not too many men. There's not too many men who don't know that scene, and that's Wallace's battle cry.
Yes, I love that scene there. Whenever I think of the movie, I think of that scene, and I think it because it was such a turning point for everyone.
Oh yeah.
Even everyone that was watching. So let's get into the book. We've actually passed a lot of time, believe it or not. We've got about 15 minutes left. But let's get into the book. I really want to start off with at least chapter 1, if we can maybe go through a little bit of that. See if we can get through a little bit before we have to get off the air. But it's from the beloved son to warriors, I guess is the chapter itself.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that and why that's so important, especially why did you choose this passage here to be the very first thing? When I read it, there were some pretty tough situations that I could see some guys reading the first paragraph and either getting really pissed off and throwing the book away or break down and crying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there a reason why you said, okay, I'm going to come out swinging right here in the beginning?
Yeah, it was, it was a great process with an editor friend and the opening scene, whether it's in a film or a book or any story you tell, how do you set it up? And we looked at, let's grab these examples and they don't feel even still all that extreme. We tell two stories, one about a man named Jake and one about a man named Nathan, and they're everyday guys, and yet both have taken different roads and they're ending up in the same place.
Yeah, I noticed that. I mean, then they're both from situations where you could really, you got one who's just not lived the greatest lifestyle with a father and,
had a lot of wounding
and everything else, a lot of wounding situations, and then the other one's a pastor.
Yeah,
and so you got these two lives, and pretty much anyone reading that, some people could take offense to the things that come out of that.
Yeah,
but it can expose that weakness.
Yeah, and folks. The hope is that instead of something that they would take offense to, maybe that would be back to what we were talking about, 20 minutes ago. What are you so angry about? That might be the invitation to keep reading.
If someone is mad and angry, normally that's the time for you to just stop and say, okay, let me think with a clear head. Let me put this down. Let me pray. Let me get in the right mindset. And then let's reapproach this.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, we were trying to, instead of offend men, we were trying to encourage and provoke them to these two storylines that represent kind of two ends of the spectrum.
Maybe
you know.
offending probably wouldn't be the right term. It's probably more hitting the heart so deep that it's painful.
Yeah, we were going for an invitation. And an invitation to keep reading, and that they could identify with one of these men that they would then...
And they could definitely fall, you know, the way those two men lay out, you either, that there's one extreme or the other, and somewhere you either hit one of those or you fall somewhere in between.
Yeah.
So the
first chapter, we were trying to give a couple examples, like Jake and Nathan, and then as we moved on, we wanted to define some terms, like we were doing earlier, the warrior, the heart, art. You know, what are these terms meaning? And as a writer, what do I want you to understand that I mean when I use these terms as we move on? So that's kind of the first chapter, is laying not the foundation, but more clearing the deck of you know, we'll dig and lay some footers later, but let's kind of clear and put the some of the architecture, some of the plan, the blueprints of where we're going to try to invite you to go in this book, and that's what we did in the first chapter. That's why it was important to talk about the warrior's way, or what have we gotten as men? What have we been? What has been the encouragement or the indictment on men? We wanted to talk about that in the first chapter. Could there be a better way than what we've been given, than how we've been instructed? You know, a lot of men, you know, they kind of get a weekly either pep talk or beating, depending on, you know, how their particular church goes, or they get to step into a Sunday morning that encourages them, invites them to live a certain way, and then they step out on the battlefield, and to what we've been talking about, it just all hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
and they're dazed, confused. Life's not happening like the sermon said it should.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Even with a lot of Christian movies I watch out there, it's like once you become a Christian, it seems like life becomes perfect, and it's not like that.
It's maybe the opposite.
Yeah, and even I've sat in sermons before where it almost feels like if you do this, you're going to live this perfect lifestyle, and it's like, why do I feel like I struggle more trying to do the right thing than it is just to go with the flow?
Right.
You know, but in the end, you always see the reason why.
Yeah. So we wanted to get a plan to, we wanted to offer men, in that first chapter, at least try to establish some things that. What if there was another plan? Would you be interested? And the hope would be that they would turn into the next chapter and explore some more. That we could that first chapter would intrigue them somewhere to say, there might be something in here for me.
Yeah.
So
when I read the first chapter, and also when we were down at the cabin and the thing,
filming,
some of the stuff that really hit me was talking about the warrior. First, you need to become the beloved son before you can become the warrior. Thinking of that, and then also hearing some of these stories about maybe guys that may have grown up in abusive relationships. Whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it is that may have attacked them from their father or other male figures in their life. How is it that we can view God's love, and is it skewed at times by the way that we were treated and loved by our own father, our own male role models in our life? And to break someone outside that mindset, saying that God's love is much greater and much better than anything that you've ever experienced here on earth. Even if you had the greatest father on earth, his love is even greater and deeper than that. Or if you've had a father who was abusive and everything else, which in mind, gets you to think, is this how you treat love? That's why, as a cop before, I've seen, one domestic violence family grow up and their kids grow up to be more domestic violent situations, because the kid learns how to treat the wife and saying, this is what love is supposed to be like, and vice versa. The girl finds guys that are abusive because they associate that with love.
Yeah. I mean, you're I'm either stealing your stuff or you're stealing my stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's an absolute. Are we skewed? The answer is yes.
Oh, yeah.
And again, whether your dad was on point and did a great job, let's not underestimate the enemy's work. There's plenty of privileged, wonderful homes that we still see a son or a daughter not want that kind of provision and protection, find their ways into all kinds of messes. And so, one of the questions that we want to answer as we explore is how do you understand love? How do you perceive it? Because I love what you just said about, how you were loved and what does it then shape in terms of how you then set up your world
to love and be loved.
And so many of us know the subtleties, if not the screaming kind of performance type love, conditional love. That's what I mean. So it's so hard for God to squeeze into that when he really wants us to let all that go and to be loved unconditionally. So when you get passionate, the pastor or the radio host or the author gets real passionate about just, he loves you. But until they experience that love for themselves, it's a commercial.
Yeah.
It's an ad. It's a promotion, and it's a good one. But until they experience God loving them, until they taste and know that he's good,
yes,
they often will settle for the imitation and the strings attached and the conditional kind because it's more comfortable or it's more known. It's more the way that they've had. Does that make sense?
No,
so
it does.
We try to tackle a lot of that early in the book. You have to look under the hood, in the attic, in the basement. What's stored up in your story that's taught you about what love is, what it's like.
It's blinding you from
that can keep you at arm's distance from this kind of love that God's trying to get through all that matrix that that's what he specializes in, breaking down these walls, rescuing the captives, and in order for us to experience his love. It's like God has this very vulnerable thing that he does, it seems like, where would you let me love you?
And does that kind of move right into that next chapter of your book where it's like getting your heart back?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not something you can go and do and then bring to him. It's something that you do with him. And so, most of us haven't examined our history, our personal history. I know, it's a wonderful thing to go on the family tree and look at the heritage, look at the history. But I mean, really personally look at your own. What are the things, the events that have happened in your life that have shaped your life?
And not to use those things as excuses.
No. To understand them and
to understand how the enemy's going to attack that.
You're right. And to you're talking about something right there, even that little phrase, and how the enemy's going to use them. I mean, we have a lot of believers who have no idea what that phrase means, how the enemy's going to use them.
Yeah.
I mean, so we have to help our friends, our readers, unpack that phrase. And there's a chapter about that and how the enemy's going to use that.
I agree.
So if you don't know there's an enemy, or you don't know how he works, or you don't know how it works, or you don't know what the enemy's up to, you see how much...
What are the soft parts that he's going to attack?
You see how many soft spots you have now.
Yeah. Shows you how vulnerable you can be, and that's where Christ's protection comes in.
Yeah.
And if you just keep those things hidden in the closet, Satan's going to constantly open that door on you.
Yeah. And they'll come up at the most inopportune times.
Mm-hmm. And then you'll end up creating excuses for it, or you'll change your attitude, you'll get angry.
You'll blow up.
Yeah.
Or you'll go hide, you'll just quit, you'll stop.
That's why your relationships are failing. That's why some guys can't have a relationship with their kids, is because Satan is poking at those little things instead of actually bringing them out and letting God deal with them, and being aware of where Satan's going to be attacking you. I agree 100%.
Yeah. So that's, we get, getting your heart back and taking God up on the offer of letting him love you. I mean, it's not. There's no way around it. It sounds pretty vulnerable. It's pretty vulnerable to let God love you.
That is very tough.
Talk about courage. That's a great place for a man to start, to go and get this belovedness that's there, but he hasn't seen it. He hasn't experienced it. He doesn't know it to be true. And what does that look like? So that can be the first leg of the journey for a lot of men. Every man actually is going to have to go back and reclaim what's been. Jesus, in that same John 10:10 passage, says, before I came that you might have life and have it to the full. In that same passage, he says, the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Well, I believe that's where he comes. He comes to steal your innocence. He comes to kill joy. He comes to destroy love. I mean, steal, kill, and destroy can apply to so many significant things that God's up to in a man's life.
And most people think of those things as stealing my money or, killing me physically. But there's so much more to that.
It's a deep work of the heart. It's a deep work of the heart.
He's trying to kill the heart. He's trying to destroy it.
Yeah.
And if he can harden that heart,
the
the further away you really become from having that heart of Christ, like Christ.
And you may have some great answers to your questions finally. Why?
Yeah.
Why does this stuff happen? Why does this always come up? Why is this never, we've seen him really escort men back in their story to reclaim ground that was lost, ground that was stolen, ground that was destroyed, ground that was taken by an enemy. Particularly one area that we touch on in the book a little bit is pornography. I mean, no man was looking when he was 8, 9, or 10 for pornography the day it showed up.
Yeah.
But this is one of the ways that the enemy can steal, kill, and destroy.
It's grabbing after those emotions.
Through those images and through that invitation to, this is what a woman's for. Later in the book, I mean, it takes us about 12 chapters to get to the chapter we want to write about loving a woman.
Which I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, next week maybe we can get there. But yeah, that's you're going to need to know who you are. You're going to need to bring strength to that relationship, not try to get strength from that relationship. And that's true for all the relationships that we were made for. Love one another, Jesus says. Love one another. We have the equipment to do that, or else that would be a very unkind commandment.
Yeah.
But what's in the way of doing that? And that's where the invitation of being the beloved son, to walk with Christ back in our story so that we can go forward with Christ into our story is a big part of that, the first chunk of the book.
That is awesome. Well, any of our listeners out there, you men out there, you got Father's Day coming right up.
That's right.
And I think, I really see this as being something that'd be perfect for the man. It's something that will change their life forever. Even the little bit that I've been able to dig into this in the time that I spent with you guys up there, it has changed my heart. It's changed the way I view life and the way I do things. We've talked about it, and if you feel like your life is trashed, you don't know where you're going, you want a relationship with God, but you don't understand that, you don't understand His love, you don't understand how to get there, this book is for you. Mm-hmm. I honestly, wholeheartedly believe that this book here is life-changing. It's going to make your marriage better. It will make your relationship with your kids better, with friends, with family. It will overall, it will teach you a way to deal with these emotions and how to bring those things out, but then also how to build that relationship with God that is much deeper.
Yeah.
I believe this book is for you. And matter of fact, you can actually log online, and I appreciate what you guys are doing. Any of you guys listening, if you log on, you'll actually get 25% off the book cover from the website. Plus, any book ordered, they'll be giving $3 towards Bragg and East, which most of you listeners know about the movie that I'm working on, My Calling, and some of the struggles I went through. And I've learned a lot, and even, going through some of the stuff with you guys has helped me through a lot of that with the movie. But if you log on to www.heartofawarriorbook.com/HW for Heart Warrior, Wagz, W-A-G-Z. You can also find that same website on my Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram. It's at Wagz Film, W-A-G-Z-F-I-L-M. Places that people can log on, like, share, post, follow you guys about what you guys are doing, because you guys are doing something great. And I want people to be able to keep up with you for conferences and other things. It's going to really change the hearts of men.
Thanks. The heartofawarriorbook.com website has a lot of, we've got a weekend event, one up in the Northeast in the fall, one in the spring of 2016 up in Virginia. So there's more than just a book going on. There's a message, there's a mission, there's a movement, there's something God's put on our hearts to offer men. So to create that environment in a weekend where men can do the kind of work that you're talking about, we need to do. We've created an environment to do that in a retreat environment. But the journal workbook and the piece that you worked on, the DVD series,
Yes.
those are actually going to come out later in the summer, like August, 1st of September. So you can grab some friends and go through this together. I mean, life's fun and a lot better together. So if you can grab 4 or 5 buddies and walk through the DVD series, but to get the book and to begin to explore with a highlighter, like a lot of us do, right in the margins, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's available, and that website has some of the blogs are there, some of the video productions already there. Ways to get acquainted with it, order it. To get on the Wagz strategic partner, though, they need to go through that portal that you described, so that they can get the donation back to the film production
And get the 25%.
Yeah, 25% off.
And it's www.heartofawarriorbook.com/HW-WAGZ. That's HW for Heart Warrior, and then WAGZ, WAGZ. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you having on the air. Thank you all the listeners who called in. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I've been touched, and I know many other men out there have as well. And we look forward to having you next week.
I'm looking forward to second half, part 2. Let's do it next week. It'll be good.
Next week, same place, same time. Thank you for tuning in to Wagz Film Radio. See you later.